All right. Welcome to the Great Reset with Goodwill Hinton. I'm your host, Will Hinton. Tonight, I am joined by my friends Josh Jackson of Pace Magazine and Nick Purdy of Wild Heaven Beer. The idea of what this video series is going to be is here in 2020 with COVID-19, there is a sense of kind of the world being on pause. And I've heard a lot of people talk about, we want to, go back to normal. And I think there's some thoughts of maybe that old normal isn't what we want to do. Maybe there's a better new normal. So we're going to have a discussion tonight. This is kind of an intro to the series. In coming weeks, I'm going to have on other guests from business, from music, from other sectors of society. But we're going to start with a discussion with Josh and Nick and myself. If you're watching live, feel free to drop any comments, questions you have, and we'll address them when we can. So Josh, do you want to kind of start us off and kind of talk about, where you were and kind of when you first realized this was going to be like a real pause?
Yeah, well, before I do that, I'm looking at the live stream here and it doesn't look like it started yet. So if you want to take a second because it looks like there's some people waiting to join.
Yep, same. So why were you sacrificial lambs? We're cool with this. It's fine.
Okay, let's see if I can fix this. And it's not going on. Why is it not going on?
So what are you using to stream?
I'm using Restream to send a signal to both of them. So let's see what Restream is showing.
I didn't even look at Facebook. We might be live on Facebook. I have not looked.
We're live on both.
Okay.
All right, I'll take your word for it.
All right.
Then let's just get into it.
All right. So where was I when I realized that this was going to be a bigger thing? It's funny. There was an Atlantic article that came out recently talking about March 11th as sort of the day. And that was absolutely true for me. And I know it was true for both of you because I was at Nick's house with you, Will. We were there to watch a soccer game. And as we were there, it seemed like everything was happening at once. Tom Hanks was diagnosed with COVID. The NBA was announcing that it was ending the season, which shocked. I don't think any of us saw that coming before that day. I mean, we knew it was going to sort of gradually get worse. Even when we were in like at the end of February, we were on a trip up to Nashville for another soccer game. And, we were talking about how this was probably our last hurrah. We knew that this was coming, but I don't think we knew quite how soon or quite how drastic. And that day, it just felt like, okay, well, we're going to remember where we were when all this happened. And that happened to be at Nick's house.
Yeah, and and we were there, and when it began to happen, it was that sense of dominoes falling. You didn't know, we had no stay-at-home orders at the time. Like, it wasn't about shelter in place yet. It was only about these weird edge events, large, massive gatherings. And I remember, and I was actually reading a friend of mine's piece today about how the golf world and how they kind of held out for a few days. They were having the Players Championship at the time. And they actually said that they were going to continue the tournament with no fans. That edict from the PGA, a fairly powerful sports organization, lasted all of 6 hours before they're like, actually, we're not having a tournament at all. It's just over. And I think all of us were really bewildered of that 24-hour period from the moment where Rudy Gobert tested positive for the Utah Jazz, right? And the medical officer came for a few days. They were having the Players Championship at the time. And they actually said that they were going to continue. I'm hearing a recording of me right now. That edict from the PGA, a fairly powerful sports organization, lasted all of 6 hours before you're not having a tournament at all. It's just all right. And I think all of us were really bewildered of that 24-hour period from the moment where Rudy Gobert tested positive for the Utah Jazz, right before the medical officer came for a few days. They were having the players. I was waiting for myself to finish. That was weird.
I don't know where it came from.
But so we waited. We saw that happen, and then I remember that was a Wednesday. I spent Thursday for our business. We're a brewery. And I spent that day primarily figuring out what to say to our customers about what are we doing? How is it going to work? This is before any governments were telling me what we were allowed to do or not do. But we had to figure out a new question, which is what's the right thing to do? What's going to play well, frankly. I had to think about optics a little bit. And Will, one of the things that has been really striking to me as a business owner and a person trained in like general business practices is all the new questions I've had to answer in the last month and a half that I don't have any rubric for. The other day we released a beer, and the beer was called We Will Meet Again. And the reason we named it that is we were really inspired by Queen Elizabeth II and her speech she made to the British people, only the fourth one she'd made since she was a young girl in World War II, other than her annual Christmas messages. And my wife said to me that day, she goes, are you worried people are going to think the beer called We Will Meet Again will cause people to think that you agree with the governor of Georgia and that we should all be opening our businesses up right away? And I'm like, oh crap, you're right. That's a weird, like, you're right. Actually, I had to ask Josh to help me to write copy explaining that we were not actually going to reopen completely or really at all, while releasing a beer called We Will Meet Again. And who cares about the details? I just wanted you to know, I've never in my career had to figure out how to handle a public health question, a political question, and a marketing question all at the same time. Like I don't have any rubric for that.
Yeah, and that's, when this happened, it became almost a joke that you got an email from every company on earth of like how they were handling it, but everybody had to sort of like explain where they were in all of this. And that was a strange thing because there were, you don't need that from your tire company or whatever, but at the same time, everybody was trying to navigate completely new waters together. And it's been weird. I don't know if this is true for the two of you, but March seemed like it was 12 years long, and April has just flown by because March, every couple days, the world changed. The world just completely dramatically was thrown on its head. And so it just sort of stretched out between when you looked back at the end of March and you remembered where you were at the beginning of it, it seemed like a lifetime ago. And then everything sort of settled into, this weird new normal.
Josh, I hate that term. Tell me why I hate the term. Why am I so uncomfortable with calling it the new normal? I knew you were about to say it, and I wanted to object to it before you even finished.
I was gonna go beyond that. I mean, what we've been calling like this we are entering a world, but we as humans have to find some normalcy in whatever our situation is. And that's why, like the new normal, it's not the new normal. This is completely abnormal, but we find routine, we find our own normalcy, even in the upheaval that's going on. And April, while...
The artist that amazingly named their record The New Abnormal?
What's that?
There was an artist like a week ago that named their record The New Abnormal.
Sure.
Huh?
Yeah. Wasn't that the Strokes?
Strokes, right? Yeah, the Strokes.
Yeah, Strokes.
Perfect. I'll take The New Abnormal. I'm down with that.
The New Abnormal. But anyway, we settled into it, and all of a sudden, April kind of flew by. Like comparatively, like March was 10 decades compared to, where it's already April 27th. So, it's been such a strange thing from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint. Of course, so many people there's the perspective on this is so varied depending on if you're a healthcare worker, if you're an essential worker, if you just got laid off, if you have been struggling to try to keep a small business going because you haven't been able to get a loan, if you know, like or if you're a musician who just put out an album and was supposed to be on tour right now and is now playing Zoom calls like this, it's so different for so many different people. But at the same time, we're all collectively settling into whatever this weird
No,
new.
we are settling in. I'm not arguing with that for sure. I just
So let's talk about this. So I'll share with you guys kind of when I started having some sense of not just that a pause and this idea of a new normal, but thinking about what had been previously normal and maybe we don't want to go back to that. So one night, so the first few weeks of kind of really being locked down at home, most evenings I went for a walk, just get out of the house, clear my head. And after probably the third or fourth time doing that, I noticed as I'm walking through the neighborhood, every last person is looking at me,
Yeah.
smiling, waving. There's people sitting out on their front porches. They're waving, saying hello, in ways that was not normal. And that just kind of kept happening. And the funny thing is that didn't seem normal, which kind of says where that may not be everybody's experience in their neighborhood. But I suspect that's a lot. And I started thinking, this is a lot of what I was used to as a kid, where people just were a lot friendlier in the neighborhood. And I thought to myself, and I mentioned it to somebody later that night, I said, let's keep doing this. There is no reason this can't keep happening.
right.
So then the question becomes, well, how do we, what makes this enough of an event to where it's going to have lasting impact upon people's lives, or will people just go back to the way things were?
Yeah, and you've heard me, Will, like for both of us and Josh, probably the two other moments in our lives that would have any comparison to this would be the Challenger explosion in 1985. And the reason that you can remember it is you remember where you were, right?
Yeah.
It didn't have any real effect on your life other than it was kind of a story and you talked about it and it was sad, but you remember the moment, right? And of course, 9/11 would be the other big one. And 9/11, we all remember where we were when we started to encounter that information that morning and all that. On the other hand, like after about a week, other than like paying attention to the war story in the Middle East, like didn't really impact your life a lot. Maybe you had a financial impact, but most people, not really a big day-to-day deal. So for about half of the time we've been in this, really most of the time, because I realized we talked about that Wednesday when Rudy Gobert tested positive for the Utah Jazz, and 48 hours later, the Atlantic, who had a week before written cancel everything, turned out they were right, and we did. That was so fast that I told you guys that I felt like, and I didn't live through World War II, obviously, that I felt like the closest analog is not Vietnam, which was very diffuse and spread over so much. There's no moment right there. This was like kind of like D-Day, kind of like we got dropped into the middle of World War II. And the reason I think that, and I still think that, is that it affects everybody. We all are feeling it. You can't have a conversation almost about anything else. Yeah. During World War II, everybody in America had to pull together. We had to change our jobs, change our factories, do whatever it took to help win the war, right? Hopefully this won't be as deadly as that, but.
So yeah, the cancel everything, the moment before that Wednesday, March 11th, one of the biggest things was South by Southwest canceling.
Right.
That felt huge. And it felt like, wow, that was a really big step. And looking back on that, I mean, can you imagine had that gone through?
Right.
That they would be teaching about South by Southwest and the great pandemic of 2020 and how that was partly the cause of, a million people dying. Like thank God that they took that very difficult step. And I hope South by survives. And I hope, Austin, the impact felt on Austin is huge. And I hope all those small businesses that were counting on it survive. But that would have been terrible. But going back to Will, what you were saying, I mean, like within days of that Wednesday.
That Wednesday.
Yeah. Our email chain in our neighborhood was, everybody was like, hey, if anybody needs help getting groceries, hey, if anybody, like there was, just people like, what do you need? What can we do? How can we help? And, that is, humanity does that in times of crisis. We rally around each other. This is an interesting time in that it's prolonged. It's so different for everybody, but we were talking today that there's just no time for meanness right now. Like there's, there's how can we all help each other? How can we help the people that we don't know? That idea of helping people you don't know by just being responsible and wearing a mask. And there's anger between people really, set on severe social distancing and people that are being lax. And, so you have these, like everything else, it's getting polarized. But in general, it's just everybody kind of rallying together, seeing how they can help each other, making sure that people who are celebrating their birthdays during this or whatever feel special, just not just physically helping each other, but like emotionally being there for each other. There's an earnestness, a genuine sense of community and love. And so, yeah, that's the question of how do we keep the best of that when this goes away and the need is still there.
Do you guys, either of y'all think anything lasted from 9/11? The patriotic fervor that we felt, do you think any of it had any impact on our culture on a long-term basis?
Positive? Because I can point to some negative things where.
No, I'm definitely asking about the positive.
I don't know how long lasting it was. There was certainly a resurgence in interest in joining the military to serve one's country. And I don't think I think that did go beyond just a year or so. I don't know how long that went. There's obviously other questions around that.
Sure.
Other than that, I think the lasting impact has been around air travel.
Also when you look at 9/11, there was very much an us versus them mentality that ruled the day. And so you had an anti-Muslim sentiment that lasted. You had security over anyone who was not us. So that was a legacy that I don't think that I would want to compare to. This is more man versus nature. This is us. There's a threat that is a threat of all humanity, and it is a weird threat to the world in that it is as global a threat that humanity's had, really affecting people day to day. You can say, well, nuclear war is a threat to, but like that's actually harming.
You guys think this is the biggest global threat since the Black Plague?
I think it's probably going to end up, so when I think of comparisons, I think of the Great Depression and think of, what stories I've heard from my grandparents. I think both sets of my grandparents were profoundly impacted by the Great Depression and their views on money and jobs, and so many things were impacted for a generation or more.
Right. So it made people that live through that. We've heard it all. It makes them conservative, not conservative in the political sense, but people that are careful and conserve resources, like by instinct. Do you think we're at a point where anything like that would come out of this? I don't feel like anything that permanent quite yet.
I think it's a little too early to tell. We don't know. At this point, there's such the kind of acute sense of COVID-19 spreading and the fear of that. And I don't think we have fully come to understand yet what the economic impacts are. It's hard to say how long lasting they will be. We're all hoping they're not going to be long lasting. So in some sense, we hope there isn't a great impact there. But it's hard to say. So, in my mind, it is for what change we are seeing. Well, then what are those areas? So, I guess one of the questions I would ask both you guys is both from a personal perspective, what do you see? What would you hope to be kind of a new normal that you're saying, the way I was doing things or the way my community, we were doing things, maybe there's a better way forward? Can you guys think of some specific examples of what that might look like in your own lives?
Go ahead, Josh.
I'll start. For me, and this has been unexpected for me. I, there's this idea that we're all losing track of days and when is it the weekend and when is it everything. And, and I'm definitely working some on the weekends just for the nature of my job, but I've craved being back in nature. And so I've found all of these amazing trails around Atlanta and, I've taken the kids hiking just, 15, 20 minutes from my house almost every weekend. And, like there's that, we all have slowed down, I think, in a way that is probably kind of healthy. There's not that I've got 20 million things that have to get done. Even for people who still have jobs and those jobs still take up, a large portion of your week, there's still time left over that instead of just vegging in front of a TV can be done, doing other things. And so for me, that's been one aspect of it, just unexpectedly, personally, didn't see coming, but have enjoyed very much. Just not feeling like I have to be somewhere else when I'm walking through the woods. Also, I think there's so much to dig into, and I know you're going to do this on your show, socioeconomically and politically, and ways that things that have just been laid bare by this pandemic, that problems that always existed, racial inequalities and healthcare and access to medical care, and underlying issues that have, among the poorest. It was interesting that this pandemic, as it started in America, I was noticing like, oh, wow, we're seeing all these celebrities and politicians who have it because of world travel and where it came from. And I wondered, is this finally going to be the thing that actually affects the wealthy before it affects the poor? And how will that affect the response to it? And all of a sudden, that has been completely turned on its head, as all of those who have had to continue working in service industries and have brought, just because of not having places to sequester and for a myriad reasons. If you look at a map of Georgia, for instance, it has really decimated the poorest parts of our state and our city. And there's a whole lot that needs to be dove into for that.
Yeah.
So, Will, you're asking about what do we want to see come out of this?
Yeah.
Like, what do we take forward?
Well, and so if there's a sense that we may not want to go back to some of what has been normal, that maybe is unhealthy or not good, or things in our society that are unjust, or any number of areas. Well, what are some ways? We can talk, those things are, we see them in the news all the time. What are areas where we can say we have a real opportunity to move forward and create some new normals?
Yeah. So, our company has 2 public spaces. They're tap rooms. One has a restaurant. And this is a little bit of a literal answer to your question. It's not more of a societal one, but, we're going to make some permanent changes that'll last beyond whatever length this crisis may have, that are going to make our staff and our guests have a lower chance of transmitting anything communicable while they're in our space. Be that a cold, flu, COVID, whatever, doesn't matter. The changes that we're going to make that are going to last long term are going to make our staff and our guests safer. I think that's likely to be a pretty common mindset, and I'll be very, very specific about it. Right now, we have hand sanitizer outside of our building. Before you come in, we ask you to spray it on your hands. Does that solve everything? Nope. Doesn't solve everything. But you know what? It reduces some germ transmission, probably. And we're going to just keep doing that. And there's 2 or 3 other things sort of in that range we'll keep doing. And that's not really the question you're asking, but I do think
so that's the immediate, obviously, and that will be lasting.
Right. But I think that matters, though, because so is this going to go away and we're going to forget about it? It's going to be like, oh, we barely remember that moment. No. This is too big. It's too broad. It's too deep. It's all the things. This is going to be deeply impactful. And the reason I stick with the World War II comparison, and it's not World War II yet in terms of its overall global, let's call it psycho-emotional impact, but it's pretty big. It is global in a way that nothing has been in a long time, maybe since the beginning of the HIV crisis. And I do think we're going to remember a lot of things that have happened now. I think some of the changes that feel like moral imperatives now might remain moral imperatives. And we may gain a conscience about certain things like if you're the kind of person who maybe quickly rinses your hands on the way out of the bathroom instead of like really washing, maybe your moral compass is a little stronger now. And you're like, I owe it to the people around me who I do genuinely care about to wash my hands better. And that's really like quotidian and basic, but real, Does that make any sense?
It does. So I have a question. So let's take that at a much broader perspective. One of the things that I've been thinking through for the past few weeks is how we're going to come out of this and think through the ideas of individualism versus community in ways that we didn't before this. Insofar as that, I think there's just this growing recognition. I mean, plenty of people know this, but I think for some, it's easier to not see how connected we all are. And that, I mean, here we have something that it is very concrete that what we do can impact others. But I wonder how that might spill over into other things beyond simply worrying about.
You're asking, is there a kind of universal moral lesson that we're all learning?
Yeah, and it's, I mean, we live in a society right now. I mean, America we prize our individualism. We prize our individual freedom. We prize our liberty. And those aren't bad things. It's just, we do that to the exclusion of the communal good more than most existing cultures on Earth right now. And
pretty big assertion there, Josh. I would argue with you a little bit on that.
More than our history, more than if you look back.
Okay, I'll go with that.
In the in the 50s, we didn't have so many of the individual freedoms we have now, for better, like for worse, for the most part. I mean, like individual liberty is a great thing, but there's a flip side to it where we just were throwing out, well, I have the right to do this. This is my money. This is my land.
Yes.
This is my whatever. And, that doesn't exist in a vacuum. Nobody made their money completely by themselves. They made their money because of all the communal goods and that, our public roads and all these things. So, there we are, I think, and we were already at a time where we were re-examining some of these things, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yes, the communal good, what we do, a simple thing is washing our hands when we leave the bathroom affects everybody. And particularly if you look at Asian cultures, and this was already there. Like if you're sick, you wear a mask so you don't get other people sick. Like that's just what you do. And that is not what we've been doing. And
no, you're right.
Things that make sense. Like there's a balance there that I think we can find. Hey, what, I want my individual freedoms, but that doesn't mean I have the freedom to take actions that are actually going to have a effect on the people around me.
I think you've hit on the real thing, because you guys both know, because we've had a lot of conversations recently, that I bend a little bit more toward the optimistic end of how to sort of see the future here. That's partly my personality, partly a business imperative, and partly just my reading of what I'm seeing and my reading of the facts, such as maybe they are. But it does not, and I think, Josh, you hit on maybe the most important thing here. It doesn't decrease the moral imperative. Even if I'm an optimist about, I don't know, I'm 40, whatever, I'm healthy, so I'm an unlikely whatever. Doesn't matter. I owe it to the people around me to act in their best interests, which I should do that anyway all the time. And right now, what that means is wearing a mask, and it means keeping my distance, and it means doing all the things that we're talking about, even if I personally may think, there's not exactly what we're thinking. Maybe the numbers are actually a little different, and maybe it's not as dangerous as we all think. It doesn't really matter. I still have to abide by seeking the best interest of others around me, because I can't prove what I might even have a suspicion about. And I don't know. Do you guys think that moral imperative will land? Like, will that make it through? Like, say a year from now, guys, we're at an Atlanta United soccer game. We all hope we are. Will a person who's not sure how healthy they are that day, well, frankly, they should just stay home.
Yeah.
Who wears a mask? Like what's the moral calculus that happens there? How does that work?
So you've hit on so one of the audience has asked a question. Michael McIntyre asked, are we going to have a true social contract or just a pretend one?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a great question.
And
some people will take that so seriously. You guys know, like, some people will be like all in on, like, how can I serve? Other people are going to be like, oh, well, I don't know. They're not going to buy in.
I mean, and this is not new. Like anyone out there who has ever like volunteered for church nursery duty knows that parents are going to bring that snotty-nosed kid that they just, that maybe had a fever last night because they just can't stand being in the house anymore. Whatever it is, which I understand the desire for that and all of that. I mean, like on both sides of that. But, it's like, really, are you going to, are we going to be more considerate in not getting other people infected? Is the flu next year going to be at an all-time low because we are all actually practicing these things and maybe actually going and getting a vaccine?
Well, I say, by the way, yes to that. That's absolutely going to happen. Just that's my optimism coming out. But I do think that the fact that
I will not say, none of us are health experts. We're not suggesting that that's actually going to happen. But maybe we have that maybe it will. I don't know.
So let's talk more broadly. I mean, it's easy to talk about, okay, going to Atlanta United match and being careful to not go if we're sick. But I think about, are we going, like, at what point this has made me think a lot about the concept of freedom. And I think often we think of freedom as I can do whatever I want. And I'm not quite sure that that's the best way to conceive of individual freedom.
It never was.
It wasn't, but unfortunately, I think there's been too much thinking that that's what freedom looks like. And in my mind, we need to kind of, and back to what Michael said about the social contract of conceiving of, freedom to act responsibly and thinking of our, not just our families, but our neighbors and our broader community, and not just the people who look like us either. Everybody in our society and in the culture that we're in.
So you guys both pay a lot of attention to national politics, but we all know actually that local politics is way more important than most people give it credit for. Do you guys think that applies to what you're saying there, Will? Do you think the average American can sort of ignore the noise coming out of Washington and maybe even to some degree the media, but really just know in their heart how to act and how to live in a moment like this? Do you think the average person sort of knows? I'm asking both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say yes. Like,
I think there's just a heightened awareness. I mean, I think people are just worn out of the constant outrage du jour in politics. and we're faced with for many people, an existential crisis. Okay. So there is, and that leads to a lot of things. For a lot of people, it's fear, and people can act irrationally in a place of fear. But I think people are also at a spot where they're re-examining their lives and how they are connected to other people. My hope, and I'll speak for myself. I know the first week or two when we were kind of locked down, quarantine, whatever you want to call it, I was checking the news a lot, and once again, I mean, Josh kind of mentioned this earlier, because there was things changing constantly, and it just was not helpful. I mean, it just only kind of raised my blood pressure. And at some point, I'm like, I just need to kind of take a step back, and focus on what's important, focus on the work at hand, focus on my family, my health, things like that. And so I guess my hope would be is that there would be a sense of kind of maybe people taking a step back from some of that, all the tension and all the outrage that floats around every day, that's just so easy to get pulled into.
But do you feel like that's happening? Because like so much of the interpretation of the data, such as it is, seems to fall along partisan lines. Like I don't feel like it's happening, Will.
uh
I,
I
I
think it's starting to.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite the partisan lines that so much other stuff has been following along. I do think you have, you know, people that are just see this as the next thing, the next battle to fight. But I mean, I've seen a lot more people who might normally be conservative that are, you know, they still believe science and are, are not, they're acting respectfully and doing the things like I think we're all in this together for the most part. I don't think there's this huge swath of the right that is like, well, I'm going to go, try the Clorox or whatever. I mean, like, it's just not happening. Like, I don't think I don't think this is
So is this a rare moment where you're more optimistic than me?
about people.
Seems like it. Wow.
I'm an optimist. What are you talking about? Why would you think I was pessimistic? I am generally an optimist, and I
You
generally
are, but I'm usually more.
so no, I mean, like, so take Georgia for example. We now can go bowling and open tattoo parlors and all these things, and you know, even the businesses that are opening seem to be doing it super carefully. Most businesses are not. Just because they can doesn't mean that they're like, oh yeah, okay, well, plague's over, come on down. You can go to Waffle House now, but hopefully they're going to be, trying to take all the precautions to, you're not getting a menu that somebody's touched before or something like that.
Right.
It's still probably too early for Waffle House to be open. It's probably a stupid thing, but most businesses are not doing that yet because they don't think we're ready. I mean,
Let me ask you guys a question. And Will, it's your show, so tell me the dumb question.
Ask the question.
How much empathy should we have for people whose decisions are being made between health and financial stability?
Man, so I love that question, because I just don't think it's part of what I'm seeing, and it's mostly on social media, but I think I've seen some in the mainstream media and other places, is that we have this choice to make between health and people's lives and the economy. And I just think they're inextricably linked. I don't think you could have it's not an either or. And I think the sooner we can have a more mature discussion around, yes, we want to be safe. We need to keep this from spreading. We don't want hospitals to get overwhelmed. And yes, there's also people that are in dire straits financially now, that they're, I mean, I think one of the things we're discovering very quickly is that a good chunk of America has about, can't even make it a month without a paycheck, which is,
Not
and that
news.
kind of, it's not news, but we're seeing the reality of it now. That's the difference. So it's one thing for us to kind of know that happens, and we see it here and there throughout our cities on these individual basis where we hear these tragic stories of somebody losing a job, but now we're seeing it writ large in throughout our society. So now we have to grapple with what that looks like. So I think that's where the conversation needs to be had. You know, all the sound bites. I'm just hoping we can move past the sound bites, past the wanting to be proven right. I posted something about this last week, Nick, that regardless of what one thinks about what our political leaders are doing, there's a real sense that there's no easy answers here.
No, you're right about that.
There just aren't.
No, I mean, and I've written in criticism of Georgia's governor Brian Kemp, and I think he made the wrong decision. But I think the reasoning behind his decision, it's pretty easy to trace when you look at the dire straits of our fiscal system, which I think there's some responsibility of how we got into this position. Yet I don't think he's cavalier about, well, okay, it's okay if people die. I mean, I think he deeply cares about he's got to, right? About the people of Georgia, and it's just trying to make a very difficult decision. I think he made the wrong one, but I think it's a difficult decision, and we've got to open at some point. There's got to be a process of opening, and there's differences that we're going to have in how we do this and what the smart way to do it. But every single governor of a red or blue state has a really tough call to make, and it's not. You can't just say, okay, well, we're going to do everything we can to make sure the least amount of people don't die, or we get rid of all the cars in our states. I mean, but at the same time, you can't just, oh no, our economy's tanking, we've got to just open up again and put people's lives in serious risk, a lot of people's lives in major risk. It is this weird balancing act, and it's tough, and I don't envy the people who have to make it.
And let me tell you that that's the macro, and the micro is me as a small business owner. I have 2 public spaces where people can come in and consume our products and pay us money. And as you might expect, I'm interested in that happening as much as possible. But at the same time, the way social media works, particularly, and just the way the moral imperative works, we can't just do what's permissible. We have to do what's right. We have to do what's safe. And to be super honest, we have to do what plays, like what people will accept. Yeah. And so Brian Kemp, as the governor of Georgia, he did a very large circle. What happens inside that circle is up to individual business owners, and I'm one of those. And I'm choosing to be much more conservative than the governor is asking me to be, out of respect for our staff, our customers, et cetera, and just the lack of knowledge and information that we have. At the same time, though, the other people that I really care for are employees, and giving them work to do.
No, and that's that. I mean, you in a very micro fashion, and just with Wild Heaven, that's the thing, is like, you want to keep everyone employed. You also want to keep everyone healthy and alive. And I mean, so many people are having to make these decisions of, how do I do both those things? Because, oh my God, can you imagine opening up, having it rip through your staff and having one of your staff die from COVID? Yeah. I mean, like, how do you live with that? Well,
I've said to a number of people that there's not one class I had in business school that talked about this. And Will, this is the Great Reset. That's the name of your show. What's different in the future? What matters in the long term? How are we going to change or maybe improve as a society? I mean, I'll speak from my little small world that I think in the business education world, we've talked about the triple bottom line for a long time, which has to do with social responsibility and how does a company do more than just focus on profits? Can it make the world a better place? Well, this is like the fourth bottom line. Like it's a whole new one I have to think about. I have to think about health and safety and how politically that plays. This is the whole optics thing that, like, in Atlanta right now, a lot of restaurants are not reopening, even though the governor has said you can, but they're using it as an opportunity to sort of do a new kind of marketing where they're claiming a kind of defiance. I'm not even sure that's really true because maybe they're not ready. I don't know. Like, it feels weird to me, but we have this new kind of business calculus that, like, I'm all about change and new stuff, but guys, I'm telling you, I'm having to think about things in a way that I was not prepared to think about. And Will, in your great reset, I feel like there's a new conversation that business owners might have to have in the future to prepare themselves for what it means to run an organization. Josh, I mean, you have an office and people come into it, bands come into it, and now you have to think about how do you create content that's compelling, generates page views, advertising dollars, etc. At the same time, some band just got out of a van and they drove from St. Louis and now they're going to walk into your building. Well, what does that mean?
I know. Y'all,
you weren't having to think about moral imperatives in that conversation before.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm a little distracted. I just got a terrible text that my dad may have broken his hip and is in the ER, which is not a place that you want to be when you're 80 years old right now. So I'm going to let you two take it from here. Yikes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Josh.
We'll pick it up later with you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Yep. So Nick, let me, I want to hit a question that one of the people, the commenters, said that we can kind of talk about, that I'll probably hit on a future episode. So our friend Leroy Barber, he was listening in earlier.
Hey, Leroy.
Asked about kind of solutions about hand washing. How do we broaden that conversation to talk about some of the apparent racial disparities that COVID-19 is uncovering? I mean, I took a look at there was you may have seen this too, a map of DeKalb County here in Atlanta that showed kind of the rate of infection in different zip codes. And not surprisingly, there was a higher rate of infection. It highly correlated to socioeconomics and race.
Yeah, and what Leroy knows, and Leroy, I hope you're still on the call, and I wish, frankly, you were here with us. That'd be great. Unfortunately, we know that there's systemic racism in this country that is baked into the superstructure of how our society works. It goes back decades, many, many decades. Because I've observed what you're talking about, Will, and it feels like a lack of information, not a lack of brains.
Yeah.
And I feel like that lack of information is systemic. And I live in a neighborhood that is kind of on an edge between two different socioeconomic worlds. So we're really close. And I see kind of a group of people that maybe are coming from a different place right now. And I feel like, I'm the kind of person who, as you might expect, would listen to NPR and read the New York Times and blah, 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 all the expected stuff. And not all of it's perfect, but there's some pretty good information there. And I feel like a lot of the people that maybe are dealing with this in a way that skews in a perspective that maybe looks like one race is dealing with it in a harsher way than others. I feel like it's an information problem. It's a system problem. It's not a problem of those folks. And I don't know how to say this in a way that's right, but
yeah,
I feel like we're seeing yet another example of what long-term systemic racism can do. It can fucking kill people. And sorry to anybody that offends.
Yeah, so I think that's a topic, and Leroy, look to get an email or text from me. I'd love to have Leroy on here to talk further, not just kind of, part of what I want to do on the show isn't just, hey, let's talk about the current problems we have. But, I'd love to have Leroy paint a vision of, okay, what would be wonderful change to come out of this moving forward? What would a greater sense of justice look like? Um,
It's super complicated though. It's
it
so
is.
hard to solve that shit.
It is. But if we care about justice, so in my mind, Nick, I think the first place is for me, and I've thought this for a number of years. I think it requires just a lot of listening. Um, I don't know, where you talk about the information. I mean, those are things that over the years I've started learning more information by simply listening to friends that have
Absolutely.
different life experience as me. Um, and maybe this can be a place where some of that starts, where we start to be better at listening. And that gets back to the empathy
Yeah, well,
that we
the
talked about
problem
earlier.
here in Georgia, and this is from and I'm not a very cynical person, as you know, but like my cynical side will come out here a little bit. A lot of what's going on politically has to do with money and where it comes from. Somebody asked me, because we're a brewery and we make and sell beer, and we're doing that because we're considered an essential business. Okay, great, thank you for that. They asked me, why are liquor stores open? Why is that essential? Well, there's some health actual reasons that I'll not get into here, but there actually are some health reasons. But the other reason is that the people that sell products to liquor stores are the wholesalers. The wholesalers are owned by extremely rich old white families in almost every city in America. Those families also happen to be the biggest political contributors in their states.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit cynical about that. So when it comes to why do we do the things we do, the old saw of following the money still applies.
So perhaps we could use some greater transparency.
Well,
Kind of to your idea of more information.
more information. I mean, look, self-interest is at least reasonable. We can understand it.
Yeah. So Nick, we've got a couple minutes remaining. Tell me like what sort of topics you'd want to hear in future episodes about kind of the Great Reset and what a new normal would look like.
Yeah.
What areas do you want us to hit on?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know how people are inspired in a sustainable way. Like, I'm not interested in your emotions. I'm not interested in how you feel today. I'm interested in what feels like it has to be permanent. And it's super boring and silly and not that big of a deal, but like, I'm literally going to make everybody spray sanitizer on their hands before they come into our tap rooms forever. Okay. I'm asking our teams that figure out our public spaces to look for things that fit 3 criteria. Is it practical? Can we afford it? Will it actually happen? Can we do it? Okay, if it's that's good. Is it visible to the customer? Is it understandable? Do they know what it means? Why we would do such a thing? And then thirdly, is it actually effective and not just window dressing? Does it actually do a thing? So yeah, the sanitizer at the door of our tap rooms. I can afford to do that. It doesn't cost nothing, but I can live with it. A customer sees that, oh, we're going to spray sanitizer on our hands on the way in. That's great. These people care. That's good. And then it actually does make a difference for cold, flu, and COVID. Never mind just the thing we're dealing with now. It'll affect everything. I actually think that we will have less cold and flu next year because everybody everywhere is going to be doing a bunch of new stuff. I only bring all that up to say, for my business, I'm looking for ways that are sustainable, practical, effective, that we can do something long term. I can't promise things that we won't do because that's a bad marketing look. I can't promise that every time anybody ever touches anything in our building, we'll immediately sanitize it. That's impossible. I can't do it. So I'm not going to try to promise it. But I am going to look for what can I promise that is actually going to make a difference, be understandable, and be practical.
So outside of any considerations of public health, COVID-19, things like that. Where do you, what opportunity do you think there is here to do something different in your industry, or in particular your business, that kind of new ideas around how people are connected, maybe where people are mentally right now? Where do you think that that might, like, ideally, what would that look like for you in your business
Yeah.
a few years from now?
Well, I mean, breweries are instinctively community oriented.
Hmm.
We we look for ways to serve our communities. And now we look at the fact that we are gathering spots as creating a new moral imperative that we did not have before. Prior, it was just, can we give you a good time? Can we serve you good beer in a nice environment? Enjoy it. Great. We've done our job. You had a nice couple hours. Now you're going to go home. That was a nice little moment in your week or your weekend. We did a good job. Well, now we have a new layer that we never had before. And when I was starting this company, the idea of creating a biologically safe environment was not on the list. It just wasn't. I mean, safe in the general sense, sure, fine, yeah. Our motto at Wild Heaven is serve your neighbor. We use it as a hashtag all the time. Serve your neighbor. And at times I've been disappointed that I didn't feel like we had enough ways to show it and to do it. And now we do. And we will serve our neighbor. And
That tagline means a lot more now than it ever did, right?
really does. And maybe that's a nice little tag for this first episode of your show, is to ask yourself, in what ways can you serve your neighbor? I think if most of us had that mindset, a lot of good things come out of it. And I know for our company, we're gonna look to that phrase and go, what does that mean? How do we work that out? How do we do that? What does that mean for us today?
Yep. Yep. Well, awesome. Thanks for joining, Nick. I suspect we may do another episode at some point that I'm going to have you back on. For those watching, thanks for taking the time. Love to get comments from you, either in the comments directly on this video, or send me direct messages with other topics you'd like me to hit in this series. If there's any particular people you would like me to interview on this series, I've already got a list, but love to hear from more people. Thanks for tuning in.